Cheers. Cheers.
Hello.
Hello. Nice. Last session. We are sponsoring beer as well, so we'll try to get you to the bar as quickly as possible. Yes. Right. If our slides come up. Okay.
Well, you heard my name already. I'm a creative director at DDB and Tribal worldwide in Amsterdam.
And I'm Wesley, one of the founders of MediaMonks, as Bert already mentioned, the biggest creative digital production agency on the planet, allegedly. And we're going to be talking about the making of KLM space, and we're going to be looking at 3 pillars: concept, creative, and craft. And we've really dived into all the in-between states to hopefully show you what happened and how we brought that together.
But before we jump into that, we'll just recap and see what happened in the end and what it turned into.
Since 1919, KLM Royal Dutch Airlines has been a pioneer in air travel. And now they launched a worldwide challenge with a prize that is literally out of this world. A spaceflight. KLM sent a high-altitude balloon into space and let people predict how high it would travel before it popped. The best prediction won the ticket. An interactive film on the KLM Space website took visitors on a virtual journey that explained the balloon's ascent. Corresponding color schemes set the mood through different atmospheric layers. 3D animations and high-end graphics informed the user on how nature's elements could influence the balloon's journey. Specially composed music and sound effects created a fully cinematic space experience. Interactive touchpoints in KLM Blue allowed users to get in-depth information about the prize, technology, and the balloon. The narrator explained about the balloon's ascent and guided participants through the prediction process. By sharing with friends, your place grew, increasing your chances. On April the 22nd, we launched the balloon from the Nevada desert. The balloon was equipped with cameras and GPS trackers that streamed data via a satellite truck in the desert to the website. Here, participants could follow the balloon's flight path through the 130,000 claimed places. KLM Space took millions of aspiring astronauts on an engaging interactive journey with a seamless experience for computers, mobile devices, and tablets, and sent one lucky winner into space.
So that's it, we're done. Beers.
It's all explained already.
So I think looking back at this project, Bram and myself were looking at what really brought it together. And I think the biggest win was the integrated core teams we had on both sides of this. So this is a little Venn diagram. DDB and Tribal, creative concept, strategy, design, project management. MediaMonks, digital production, film rollout, and project management. And in the middle of this Venn diagram, the lovely space.
I think this case is just a great argument for working very, very closely together from the start of a project like this. And when we started, I think one of the most important things that I felt was to get everybody on board probably far earlier than we normally do in such a process. So even while the concept was being sold to the client, we knew they were probably going to do it, but there's always stuff to figure out. We already brought MediaMonks on board and kind of tested the water and see what they thought of it. So let's look at some initial sketches. I think it's interesting that now that you've seen the idea, once we came up with the idea, we were faced with the problem that KLM didn't have brand design for outer space. And we wanted to create a KLM world or universe that was also spacey. And at the same time, I've heard the word used a couple of times today, epic awesomeness. It needed to be awesomely, epically awesome. So we kept saying that to each other, and we came up with stuff that was a mix of very graphic, cubic almost design, which we thought would look very technological. Then we looked at lots of different types of interfaces that we thought were very easy to use, but at the same time looked futuristic, and incorporated those two worlds. I think what you see here is just the very first design exercises coupled to user experience. And just before you go on the bottom right-hand corner, that funny thing that's blowing apart in pixelated pieces, was actually created because KLM was a little bit worried that if a balloon pops in the higher atmosphere and crashes, they don't want things crashing, they're an airline. So we came up with the solution that we would graphically let the balloon explode, and then actually to continue in the game you had to slide it and it would come back together, and then you would go on to the next phase of the game. So it was a very soft pop of the balloon in the game, and it turned into a very beautiful graphic element. And what you see here, of course, is the various screens from the experience. And once again, what we kept everywhere, a very dark, spacey background. We wanted it to be nighttime because the balloon was being launched very early in the morning in the United States. We also wanted the sun to be an important, it's almost like a spotlight in the background, making it very exciting. We wanted the desert to be almost ominous and atmospheric. And I think you can see that we succeeded with that. And then we wanted the game to be almost seamlessly connected to the whole experience of spaceflight that was in the introduction film. And we'll show you a little bit more about that later. So this is how we sold the concept.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good.
So normally when we create concepts for advertising campaigns, we used to come up with foam boards, and of course these days we all use PowerPoint or Keynote. And we thought that actually, how do you explain to a client who's asked you to do basically a sweepstakes, give away a ticket and get as many people as possible to try for it? How do you explain that you're going to send a balloon into space? So we created a film. It's wonderful stuff you can do with iMovie, actually. It's really simple. But the film is a bit longer. It's actually 4 minutes, and then it goes into the mechanics of the campaign. What we're talking to you about tonight is the digital online experience and what was designed for that. But the campaign itself was, of course, far bigger because we needed to get people there. And that was the rest of that film. So if you want to sell a concept like this, make a film.
So we actually got pulled in really early for the brief, I think right at the beginning. And I've used the magic of Keynote to replay that initial brief. So it was a very brief brief. We're sending a weather balloon to space. Okay. Live broadcasting its progress. Okay. The person that guesses its final height wins a trip to space. Okay. And it's real-time competition. This has all the red flags you would want to try and get out of a project as a production company. But I think that initial brief did one of the most important things you can do in any project, which is it combined a shared ambition. It created something that both companies wanted to create. I'll use the epically awesome quote. I think this was really one of the reasons we managed to put something together that has a lot of polish on it. So as a production company, when something like this comes in, you really look at sanity checking. You look at technology, you look at budget, and you look at timeline. The interesting thing was this was our aerospace partner.
So this is a company called JP Aerospace, and they operate from California. And they are adept at creating commercial spaceflight items. Their simplest thing is they do for high schools. They make Pong sets. And we found them through our technology lead at DDB and Tribal. And I don't know how we found them, but they were people that were actually capable of doing this. They're absolutely brilliant engineers. We had to come up with a capsule that would carry all the telemetry, the cameras, everything, that couldn't weigh more than about 3 kilograms. And if it was any bigger, the United States Air Force would shoot it down. So, and they said, we can do that, we can make it happen. And we said, yeah, but we need like 4 HD cams, and we need a television camera, and we need a transmitter, and it has to be really powerful, and we need big battery. And they said, yeah, well, let us think about it, but we'll do it. So we got them on board.
We were just really scared because our website was made in 1997.
Yeah. Wesley saw this and he went like, these guys?
They sent this through to me and I said, they're going to send something to space. Nice. Maybe they should upgrade their Dreamweaver first. So we did a sanity check, and I think one of the biggest issues at that time was every client wanted everything to be HTML based. Huge push for that. At that moment in time, I think it was too early. I don't think browsers or especially OS systems on mobile were ready for it. For some of the stuff that needed to happen. So we really started looking at how can we still do this, but really deliver something that deserves this type of concept. This was pretty much the brief. Cross-platform responsive build in HTML. We didn't really think that fitted what we could be doing with this. We looked at the design was extremely high-end. So we looked at a solution that didn't choose between HTML and Flash. We wanted to combine it. So we called this, also to sell it through, the best of both worlds approach. How can you be against something that's the best of both worlds? It's impossible. And what we ended up with was the following. It was 2 sites, 3 platforms. Awesome. So we pretty much created 2 completely separate projects, pre-launch event and live event. Flash-specific version for desktop, tablet-specific version in HTML, and a mobile-first version as well. So a lot of people have only seen 1 version, maybe 2. In total, there were actually 6 sites.
And actually, the mobile version was like a pocket-size spaceflight controller. So the sites were completely different as well. They didn't just run on different platforms. They were completely different in functionality.
With that out of the way, we had our concept. We had our idea about how we would actually produce the work. Let's go into some of the creative.
Right. All right. This is the core team at DDB and Tribal. There's 2 important people missing, the creative team, Sander and Joost. But basically, this is the group that stuck with it from the start. So that's almost a year to work on this project.
And I think the most important thing that happened in this project is this bridge between the 2.
That's Keith.
That's Keith.
He's our senior designer and art director.
Young, very hip designer, art director. And this is Stefan Bessoen, our oldest person in the company. Wears grey woolen socks. And they managed to strike up a working relationship that I think was a hugely important factor in bringing it to life. So you had somebody pushing for design and art direction, and then you had a very experienced developer and architect that would say no to some things, but also try to look at something from a creative perspective. And these 2 guys spent ages behind one desk, just hacking away. Special note needs to go to the PMs on both sides as well, because what they managed to do is take away all the budget and deadline stress from the actual production teams. Nobody there was focused on the hours they were spending, just on the polish they could add.
Oh.
We have some UX design animation work. UX first.
Well, user experience, what was special about user experience in this case is that it was really our guiding star. After coming up with the concept, the first thing we did was create a really extensive user experience design for the whole campaign. And that actually made the digital platform even better, because one of the most important functionalities that we put in was the share function that you saw in the case film before. And what we wanted was that people could simply share their place in space, which they had claimed, and that then if somebody endorsed them, they could then start the game with a head start, with a slightly bigger space, and their own space would grow. And that threw up all sorts of difficulties, which were solved in UX, as you can see here. And I still think it's probably 50% of the success of this whole campaign ended up being due to the fact that we made it so very shareable. And that the share was actually contained within the game to give you a bigger chance of winning. And that's a hard thing to do when space is something that's not tangible, and yet we had a defined amount of it. You could only claim so much space. We had a set column of space geolocated above the Earth, and we couldn't make it any bigger. We had a maximum of 300,000 participants. That was possible. And we had deduced mathematically somehow that from the millions of people we would reach, that we would at least get 100,000 participants, maybe more. In the end, it turned out to be 133,000. So they each had a certain amount of space that they could claim. So we developed an algorithm that calculated the percentage of space that it would grow every time you shared your space, which was every time just a tiny little bit smaller, but it was still bigger. So you couldn't take up the space of somebody else, and you couldn't push somebody else out of the game. That would have been unfair, we felt. And that's how it worked. So UX, vital. The mood board. I heard Stanley Kubrick mentioned. I think Moon was very important to us as an inspiration source. We looked at Russian aerospace designs in the start, and at the start we thought maybe it'd be nice if you get like Yuri Gagarin type pictures and kind of grainy, and then luckily we didn't. In the end we thought it should be much more slick and moody, and this is the mood board that we briefed MediaMonks with as well. And we said, this is the mood we want, so everything we're going to create is going to be designed in this atmosphere, and it needs to move smoothly and slickly as well, so that made the challenge even bigger. I think what you see here is the cube that we called, or the polyhedron, we called it. It is a polyhedron. The KLM polyhedron that dangled from the balloon, and that was the capsule, and that also formed the main guide for the interactive elements on the site. Well, this is where it started. And this, we thought would be fun to share with you, is actually a tiny piece of the total amount of elements that we delivered to MediaMonks to animate.
So I think if you're looking at something like that, I think one of the most important things in digital design is really focusing on UI. And I think the difference between a lot of good work I see and a lot of bad work I see is bad work tends to not have that type of attention to detail when it comes to UX and UI design. So this is some more of the design work. This is some stuff for the live phase. That design work was transferred to our team, and we really went into the animation phase. And what that means is we started looking at all those different mood elements, design elements, UX and UI elements, and started playing around with those things. So this logo animation sort of gave us a very specific style, was probably the first thing we animated, spent a lot of time on that, but that really influenced the rest of all the UI design as well. So what you'll see here is there are loads of little bespoke animated elements. Nothing is sort of standardly tweened, everything is handcrafted. Lots of keyframe animation, just real animators, not just people moving stuff around, which is what you often see when it comes to Flash.
And we actually divided the interactive movie into the different atmospheric layers that the balloon was going to journey through. And we made, well, our challenge was to make that whole journey as interesting as a real space flight. Only one person could win the ticket, so we wanted everybody who participated in the competition to get a taste of that.
And this is really about picking up all those different UI, UX elements. Something like this, loads of time went into getting this feel right. We'll actually see a prototype later on that had it very flat, so you'll see there are lots of tiny elements that move in relation to how hard the drag actually is. The higher you go, the more movement there is. The way it snaps back is also completely related to how you interact with it. Yeah. And this is actually the turn back point you were just discussing. So this was a no-go, we couldn't have something explode. So we had a piece of interactivity there that by doing this move, it actually was a seamless transition into the next scene. And that was a constant focus. Every piece of interaction needed to lead into a seamless animation that would show the next scene.
So actually people who were captivated by the film suddenly found themselves claiming a place in space. And before they knew it, they were participating in the game. And the only thing they then had to do was sort of, at the end of that, log in with Facebook, for example, which made it very easy to participate.
Yeah. So we actually are going to show some stuff about how the film came together. So this initial overview is actually the design direction we got for film from Tribal.
All right. Yeah. Ah, there we are. So once again, the mood board. I think we can, I talked to you about this before. It was important that we had all these color schemes somehow worked into the film. I think you can see there's a lot of transparency, there's a lot of space, deep space it feels like. Solar flares, high contrast, these are all important for us to incorporate into the film.
And then we got some real life shots as well.
Yeah, so this is the desert. The desert was an important place because we used to tease people with the fact that on a certain date this was going to happen. And of course, it needed to look fantastic as a launch site. Another atmospheric layer, the cloud layer. We'll go into that later, but that was a huge amount of detail went into that. Very important because it was the moment that we felt that the balloon, once it was through the clouds, it was sort of really on its way to space. Before that, it was still near where we live.
And then after getting this as a brief, we really went into script and storyboards. And I think this was quite an interesting process also for us. Because as a production company, you tend to be very focused on the production side of things because we were involved in a very early stage. We spent a lot of time between companies ping-ponging the script. And from our end, we did something slightly differently at that time. It's slightly more than a year ago, and it's something that's become quite custom to our process now, which is we added a director. Not so much a designer or an art director, but an actual director that works at MediaMonks Films.
So we treated this like a proper film. And we scripted it, then we storyboarded it, and then from the storyboard we turned it into a shot list, and from the shot list we started creating the film. And
this probably took about a month or so, I think, to nail.
Yeah, it's roughly a month working together.
And then after this, after really hashing this out, what's the story you want to tell, we ended up with the following animatic. So this is the first animatic that was sort of the guideline for all the 3D production that happened afterwards. So the main thing we're trying to do here is define timings, define camera angles. I think one of the things that came out of that initial ping-ponging session is that we had a relatively flat storyline, but we really went into camera angles within these animatics, and I think that brought a lot of extra life to it as well.
You can see the camera going down to a ground position, and then later as the balloon goes up, the camera actually moves around the balloon. And here we have the launch sequence. You can see that what was wonderful about this is that we could test the proportions of all the elements. So for example, the balloon here, the capsule is pretty big and it's pretty close to the balloon. The balloon already has a sort of realistic shape, but it helped us decide that we wanted the capsule to be a lot smaller in relation to the balloon. I mean, we could have made it big out of very light material, but we didn't feel it was very beautiful that way. It needed to be kind of fragile, buffeted by winds and elements. So later on we made it smaller. The airplane you see there is interesting because for a long time KLM wanted to have a KLM plane in the background. And we got away with not having it in there in the end. And here we are going into the last atmospheric layer, which is above the clouds and near space. Once again, I think you'll see the camera movement is already pretty amazing. It gave us a good feel for what would be coming into the image. And here we've added the polyhedrons, which were the spaces that people claimed. And we could get a feel for how big those had to be for the experience online. Because in reality, we're talking about tens of kilometers. They're huge, they're not 10 centimeters.
So that's the animatic. The interesting thing is the moment you were able to lock this down, you're pretty much, it's almost a coloring book exercise. You know the frame you're working within, and then you really have the possibility to polish what you're actually creating within those guidelines. One of the interesting things was when we were discussing this, this presentation, I tried to find our first official prototype for the site. So this was the first sort of prototype / click-through model that we shared with our client. I think KLM was also involved at that stage.
Very much so.
Yeah, and the interesting thing here is we had this in a really early stage. So what it allowed us to do is constantly refine UX, flow, animation, storytelling. And part of this is the use of the animatic, but you'll also see the actual functionalities from a digital mechanic in this version. And I would say this was probably up and running almost up to 2 months before the actual launch.
And you may have noticed that actually some of the interactive elements are still polyhedrons, and later on we made them circular because they had different functions and we wanted to discern between those. All the interactive elements, by the way, are KLM Blue. That's the branding for KLM Space in the future.
This is a great animation. Look at this. Boom.
Wow.
You can't buy that type of talent, people.
So here we were already testing the stickiness of the space that you could claim. While we were looking at this, we were already thinking about sound effects. So very easy to do. It had to be completely idiot-proof in a way. We didn't want to use anything that said need more info or help. And you could see easily where you were at the top
So,
as well.
prototype click model very early in the actual project.
Yeah.
One of the big challenges here, you just mentioned it, is that we had actual space in space, which is a really weird thing to try and sort of define. But we needed to give somebody a trip to space, which is quite an expensive price. So we had to do some calculations. I did most of these.
I'm not so good at those.
We had to do some calculations that were actually completely focused on the GPS point we were launching the balloon, because that relates what the actual space is when it comes to the coordinates we were getting from the balloon when it was up in space. And this was just probably about a 2-week process, not only trying to find how we were making that calculation, but also defining how big the space we were going to block was actually going to be. It was related to the amount of people we were expecting or could maximally add,
Yeah.
but it also needed to be something that was visually
It
interesting.
also had to do with the speed of the balloon's ascent. It takes about 3 hours to go up before it pops, roughly around 30 to 35,000 meters. And it also had to do with the wind and how far a balloon would drift, and it would have to be contained within that space as well.
So, prototype of the actual cloud. This to me is quite an interesting part, because I think in reality we could have faked this and nobody would have known. Which is, when you look back on it, it took a lot of time. But it was also the tenet of the whole project. No corners were skipped, everything had to be real. Everything had to work as we were promoting it. So this is a test with the maximum amount of people we could get in the width of that actual location. And this was all about getting the visuals right. So how many people could we add without it becoming unusable? There's actually quite an interesting one. This
is your place
I'll let
in
the
space.
voiceover
Are
end.
you happy with its position? Please confirm to continue.
We even created a little parallax effect so that people really get a feel for the 3D area that was in.
Yeah, it's actually 3D space. Nobody really saw this, but we also created a version if we had 500 users. Because for that, we actually created a visual enlargement of the actual spot. So we were expecting the first few days to be relatively slow, but we still wanted to have a visual effect those first few days. What actually happened was I think we had 20 or 30,000 in the first day.
Yeah.
So this was never used and not really needed. This shows how it actually worked. This is a pretty full house, and it's all actual 3D space mapped to the math we had in place. So this is all real and was actually used for calculating the winner as well.
And now it looks like a pretty metrically defined area, but what we calculated was that outside that area, basically it was useless. So, and it was possible for people to it was actually possible to make a very educated guess as to where the balloon would end up if you followed the weather reports, knew the temperature and everything. So,
some of the craft.
yeah.
I think the last 2 weeks of this project, the mantra was, let's make it shiny. Let's make it as shiny as we can possibly make it. This just shows some of the layering and compositing that went into the movie creation.
So cracks in the ground, more detail to the cracks, people moving in hyperspeed, light coming from within the balloon as well.
And then something internally we called the money shot. The cloud. I think we spent about 8 weeks on the cloud.
On this shot, yeah.
So this was every time we got this a little bit further, people would make the orgasm sound, like, oh, it's lovely. That's my actual orgasm sound, by the way. Not a lot of people know. Here we have some additional elements, and then it ended up as this shot, which we still love to this very day.
Ah.
And the funny thing was, this was perfectly good about 2 to 3 weeks before we launched, but we kept polishing and polishing and polishing. I'm going to give this sound
several layers of sound. One very important layer that we spent, I think, several weeks creating together with Massive Music and Kaiser Sound Studios was the background noise in space. In space there is no noise, it's a vacuum, but we wanted the whole experience to feel spacey. So we created our own special background spacey noise, which is present throughout the whole experience. On top of that, we created lots of little sounds that had to do with the interactive elements. Every element had its own sound. And that also educated the users very quickly in the design experience to know, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm claiming something, I have something, I'm dragging something. And of course, 2 other important things. One, the music, epic awesomeness again. And then the voice, because we wanted it to be told by a voiceover and not to be just a written bit of copy. And Tom, the director from MediaMonks, did the first voiceover, and we thought it would be fun to share that with you, because you'll see what a difference it makes to have a very professional voiceover. Now, it's expensive to have a professional voiceover, but we're very lucky to have had KLM decide and agree with us that that was a very important part of the experience. So.
Yeah, he's going to hate me for this. I think he's in Singapore, so don't tell him. I think this really shows the value of music in digital, and I think it's undervalued. I know clients don't really like paying for it. We have 20 to 30 seconds of the initial one with Tom and without the music, and then we go into the actual final version.
This is the countdown to a worldwide challenge, with a prize that's literally out of this world.
This is the countdown to the launch of a worldwide challenge, with a prize that's literally out of this world. A space flight.
We even checked that they were the right kind of crickets in the desert. I'm not kidding. They had to be able to live there.
But the difference is
We're nuts.
insane. The difference is insane. So something that I think in general is completely undervalued when it comes to digital. We have 3 more things. So this is really just HD porn. Not literally HD porn, but the balloon's journey. Material not a lot of people have seen. We've made a small edit.
Yeah, these are the 4 HD onboard cameras that didn't transmit down to Earth during the live event and that collected data afterwards for PR use and for our own enjoyment. And you can see how beautiful it was. The balloon is actually filming down and then filming around as well. And we created a very special independent switchboard which kept switching between the cameras. So there you go. It was a beautiful day as well. We spent hours looking at this footage, seeing if we could see a UFO, because it was right next to Area 51. But we didn't see any. Probably they were all looking at the balloon going, there's a UFO. But anyway, you can see that actually it's beautiful film footage. This was in the live site, you may have seen it, and it just, what I found amazing is that when we did it, we had never expected it to be that good. It actually, 30 kilometers up or a little bit over that is actually already so far up that the Earth becomes a real globe and you get this feeling that you are outside of the atmosphere.
So this was on the day of the live event. I think one of the fun things, one of the fun and also slightly exciting and daunting things, was that we had an actual control room at MediaMonks. Control room with cupcakes.
Yeah, maybe it's good just to mention, I mean, the way we tackled this project is like a space program, because there was so much that could go wrong. I mean, if the balloon had failed, then all these people, there were actually hundreds of thousands of people watching live in the event to see if they had gotten closest to where the balloon would pop. They would be disappointed. So we had contingency plans. We double-checked everything. We did test runs. I mean, we meticulously checked, double-checked, tested again, tested the material, tested the transmitters, then tested the website. It was just a crazy amount of testing that went into it, but we couldn't afford to have it fail. And we actually had a second balloon, which we never used, but it was there just in case. And from the control room, we were having a live discussion with people who were tweeting about the event, because there were lots of tweets going out while it was live. It took 3 hours, the whole balloon journey. And during those 3 hours, we kept talking to everybody. For example, there was a slight, tiny mishap at the beginning, so something did go wrong. The guys from JP Aerospace, being as focused as they were on launching it and making the technology work, launched it from the wrong location. So it was, I think, 60 kilometers off or something. It was quite far.
It was a completely different place.
And actually, the whole virtual space had been created to be geopositioned exactly on that spot where it should have been launched.
Yeah, the weird thing is, and that's part of the math, the place you actually launch it from, because of the curve on the Earth, it needs to be the exact space for the math to work. So what happened was one of our developers flagged it, and he said, "I'm getting really weird data. It's in a completely
It was
different
leaving
place."
outside of the claimed spaces.
So we had to do some quick thinking. But it was quite fun. We actually had them on live video, so we could look what they were doing, and we were phoning them, and we were seeing that they were ignoring their phone calls, which was quite an interesting element to it.
One of the guys at MediaMonks reprogrammed the GPS coordinates for the game. So actually, what nobody knows is that the whole game moved to the position where the balloon was launched. So it was still completely fair and honest. And luckily, we saw that at the start.
Slightly stressful.
Slightly.
So this is
KLM was there as well. We're going like, no, it's not a big problem. And I'm running from that floor downstairs and back up all the time.
We'll launch in a few minutes. This is everybody looking happy/relieved. Had it on the big screen, everybody was following it. This was the winner. That was a really interesting thing. We picked the winner live, so when the data came in, we double-checked it and then launched. Pedro from Brazil as the winner.
He became a national celebrity in Brazil, and he was on the news, I think, and crazy. And he's an aerospace student, so he's one of the people. Actually, we found out afterwards that most of the spaces claimed around him as well had been claimed by space people, engineers, and aerospace students. So they were actually pretty good at judging wind speeds, temperature, atmospheric layers of air thickness. They actually got it pretty right.
I think that was one of the interesting things, that the math worked, and people actually that should have known were closest, and one of them was a winner.
We did say that in the interactive movie. I don't know if any of you actually, how many of you did it? How many claimed a place in space? Cool. All right. In the interactive movie, if you clicked on the elements, it gave you the information. It explained to you that you could keep track of the winds and all those things. And if you did that, there was actually a better chance of winning. So that was quite cool, I thought.
Cool.
You had an influence.
That's Pedro, and that's us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.